Hello, welcome to Teddy Fisher TV. It's been some time since we got together and did a feature on the bank. This is the first one of the winter, and a happy new year, by the way. And today I want to demonstrate that we can fish on the cheap, essentially. I've come down to a river. This is the River Slee in Lincolnshire, and some very noisy chickens as well. What I want to do is go through the bait tray in a short while and just demonstrate that we can fish for pretty much way less than a fiver. This is free fishing, there are no rights on here, and like many different waterways all over the UK, this is a tributary to a main river, and the river this runs into is the River Witham. What tends to happen, like a lot of tributaries in the winter, is the fish move into these types of waters because perhaps the water temperature is just a degree or so a little bit warmer, and although the colour is not quite as I'd hoped, it's a little bit clearer than I anticipated. It's not bad. There's a nice flow coming through here because the flow's coming down from left to right, hitting this boat and then causing quite a nice crease really. And the plan today is to fish 3 baits, which I said are very, very cheap. We've got some worms, and they're straight out of the compost heap in the garden. What I do every time I have a cup of tea, or I've peeled some potatoes and some carrots and whatnot, I throw them in an area of the garden. It's been there now probably about 18 months, so there's always a real good selection of worms in there. I kicked it off with a few dendrobinas at the start, and then over time they just breed, and then they organically break everything down and just breed themselves. So a good handful of worms which I've chopped up. I've also got some maggots, half a pint of maggots, so what's that, £1.50? To be honest, they've been in the fridge for about sort of 3 weeks. I cool them down so much that they go into a sort of dormant state. It doesn't quite kill them, but it puts them in a very suspended state, and then bring them out into a bit of heat and they're wriggling and good to go. So they're not the best maggots in the world, but cheap and cheerful, just to demonstrate that, you know, you don't have to freeze them all the time, and you certainly don't have to throw them away, no way. And the third bait that we're going to be looking at today is bread. My bread I put into the oven for 20 minutes or so once I've liquidized it, and then I push it through a sieve, so it's really, really fine. And what that makes is this lovely sort of, there's a little bit more water on that now, but lovely, almost like a biscuit consistency, very, very fine. And to give it an extra boost, I put in some Teddy Fisher roasted hemp. And with that roasted hemp, I also put that through a liquidizer as well to make it even more finer. So we get this sort of slightly brownish consistency where it's been baked, but also it's slightly brown because it's got little elements of hemp in there as well. So really, really straightforward. Bread, 6 slices in a liquidizer, pop it in the oven, whack it through a sieve. A couple of slices for the hook, so you're talking 50p worth of bread, 3 worms and half a pint of maggots. Simple as you like. The tactics that I'm going to employ on the swim, as always, my rules are location, presentation and feeding. So from a location perspective, you can't beat finding a good feature, whether it be an overhanging tree, whether it be some rushes and reeds, maybe a weed bed, but a boat is a great piece to attract fish as well. There's 2 boats in the swim. The first one is slightly upstream to me, the one across the way, so it's a little bit difficult to fish because on a river and with this pace of water, you really want to be fishing downstream. So I'm fishing a pole today. So you want that rig working as it hits wherever your bait is being fed. So what I've done to avoid that, because I'm fishing slightly upstream, is I've used a bait dropper. And I'll put on some images of how to use a bait dropper and demonstrate it later on. But I've put some chopped worm and some red maggots against the end of the boat, just near some weed that's collected, where I think we're going to get some bonus perch, hopefully, fingers crossed. But my main line of attack will be in the main flow down the middle, where I've bait droppered again, 2 of these with the liquidized bread. So let's give it a little go. I have caught a couple of roach already on this central track, and I'll talk you through the rig shortly as well. But we're fishing with a Breadpunch is really, really important. Something with a little brass head, not too deep on the top, and around 4 or 5 millimeters is a good starting point for roach. This is a 4 millimeter one. Now what I do with the bread that I use on the hook, I'm not too fussed about the bread that I make the feed with. The one I've got, I've just shown you, is Kingsmill, but for my hook bait, again, I'm not too fussed what make it is, but the way I prepare it, I cut the ends off and I pop it in the microwave for 10 seconds and then just put a little rolling pin over very gently just to compress the bread, and it stays on the hook a little bit better. I'm fishing 3 meters to hand because I've got a lot of foliage around me for a start, but also it just should make things a little bit quicker. And I'm just down the middle here, and when it settles, I fed about 4 meters down the peg. So the float's 0.4 of a gram. I'm fishing about 3.5 foot of water, slight downstream wind, which is a little bit difficult. There's a bite. Nope, I've hit some weed. So slightly difficult, so not quite as good as presenting as I'd like, but it's working okay. As I say, I've had a couple of roach already, and just feed to the bites really. I don't want to be throwing in nuggets of crumb or anything like that. I just simply want to, what I'd say is, fish out the bait, which means that once the bites start drying up, they're telling me that I need to refeed and retop up. So about 3.5 foot deep, trotting through and fishing an inch off the bottom. We're just letting that go down, keeping the line relatively tight. Might need another shot on that actually. Just letting it go to the end of the swim. So, using an 18s hook, which could be seen as a little bit big, I think it's perfect for Breadpunch fishing. And just trot that through in that central track. Holding the line tight. Morning. Nothing on that run through, so a little bit further out. Again, just keep the line tight. Might need another shot on that rig. Now that about there is where I put the bread feed in. Not that you'll see the float on the camera, but it gives you an idea as to where my pole is. Fishing sort of 3 meters to hand. As I say, this water we're fishing today, completely free. Good example of lots of tributaries and little rivers and dikes all across the country, where you can keep your fishing day cheap, especially with this bait menu that I've got. Now around there is what I'd call the killing zone, about there. There's a fish. Little roach. These are what we're targeting down this central track, and bonus fish across against the boat. So average stamp sort of 1 ounce, 2 ounce. A lovely flow on the river today. There's a fish. This looks slightly better. Might net this one. Oh, there we go. Didn't necessarily need to net that, but it's definitely 1 ounce or so bigger. Oh, lovely roach. Well, I think it's time to refeed on this bread line. Now what I use is my heavier rig, which I'll talk you through in a bit. This is the one I'm going to use to fish against the boat because the elastic's a bit stronger and the weight of the bait dropper. First thing to do is pop a cable tie onto your section. Then at the back of the bait dropper there's a little loop that we pass our hook through, and then there's a small padded piece that we hook at the back so it stays on the line. Then there's a door on the bait dropper that opens, and that essentially is held by this hook just there, which we put on. So we fill the bait dropper up, not too much, otherwise it will struggle to open. So if I just put a little bit of bread in, close the door, and then the little hook is just there, and we just want it loosely holding on. Now take the rig and place it behind the cable tie, which will hold it onto the pole, because when I'm going out I don't want it to be swinging and dangling around, obviously. So I need 2 sections just to get to where I need to be, and when we get to where we want to be, we sort of slide the rig down, there we go, off of the cable tie, drop it in the water, and when it hits the bottom, there's a weight at the bottom of the bait dropper that will open the trap door. So if I put it into the killing zone, drop it down, let it hit the deck, just give it a couple of drops and make sure everything comes out, and that door, you'll see, little trap door, is now open, because it basically, it drops down to the bottom and this weight hits, and there you go, that's what it does. So we've now refed on with some bread. I'll talk you through this rig actually. We've got sort of 0.12 main line. Let's put that there. It's a little bit awkward with all these trees. So yeah, it's a Drennan SF3 float, 0.4 of a gram. Nice bright bristle, carbon stem, 0.12 main line, coming down to a bulk of number 9s, around 14 inches from the hook, and then 2 droppers of number 10s with a 6-inch hook length of 0.10 line with an 18s hook. And it's a micro barbed hook, because fishing a natural venue we can use barbed hooks. I like to use a micro barbed hook. Well, we've been fishing a couple of hours now, and this bread line has been pretty steady. I've had a fair few roach, up to about 5 or 6 ounce. However, my far line against that boat has been, shall we say, compromised a little bit. Chap across the way came out, have a good conversation about fishing and whatnot, but he wanted to feed the eels, and I wasn't aware there was many eels in here. There's a fish. Apparently there's a lot of eels underneath the little boat to the right hand side, so he decided to throw a load of sausages in, which the eels like, which is interesting. However, it has meant that I haven't had a bite across on my my worm line, and I've really banked on that as well for a bonus fish. So I've had to concentrate on this bread line. We've had a boat go through as well, which impacts sport for a little while. I decided to top up with a couple of little nuggets of crumb, which didn't do any harm. I had a couple of bites out the back of it, but I've just put in some 2 more bait droppers full of the bread feed, and I'm just continuing fishing over there. I've also shallowed up slightly more, so I'm about 2 inches off the bottom now. I was getting the bottom a little bit, dragging and catching, and I think the water level's changed a wee bit, so I've just made sure that I'm not catching on any bits of weed, and when the bolt went through as well, I think that seemed to disturb quite a bit of weed that came through. So yeah, it's as planned for the bread line, but for the bonus fish line, the worm and maggots, it's just not quite panned out, and whether it's to do with the chap feeding the eels, or whether it's to do with the boat, or I'm not too sure. But my rig for a cross was running through lovely. But we'll just see if we can't get ourselves a few more fish on this bread line. Certainly got a couple of pound of fish, that's for sure. And then we'll probably look to take a little catch shot. And it's just one of those short sessions. Probably fish for about another hour, so I'll probably fish for about 3 hours today. And hopefully we've demonstrated that fishing doesn't have to be an expensive game. I've only brought very, very rudimentary tackle with me today. A little box to sit on, an old pole of mine, and some cheap bait. There's loads of waters like this everywhere, so it's just a case of seeking them out, and if there's fish moved into them for the winter, you should get a few bites like I have today. So let's continue and see if we can't get ourselves a few more roach, and I might be tempted to have a little look across on that perch line as well. There might be some eels, you never know. Well, there you go, hopefully you can see all those in there. A nice Breadpunch caught net of fish. Fishing just shy of 3 hours. I did eventually get a perch across against the boat on the far side, but nothing as I expected. But even so, still a really nice day. Probably about 4 pound of roach there in that one perch, and some real nice stamped fish as well. So hopefully you've got some tips and you can keep the bait bill low next time you fish a free venue. So cheers for watching.